Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Crunch Lab Masters, which is part of the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. Now, the first game we're going to be taking a look at is the Armageddon game being played in Division 1 between Magnus Carlsen, the 5-time world champion, and Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia. Now, as you will recall, the two players did play earlier in Division 1. Magnus had a resounding 3-0 victory over Jan in their first match, but both players would struggle and end up in the losers bracket. And after drawing the two games, they're finally in Armageddon. Magnus's bid was a little bit higher than Jan's. Jan bid 7 minutes and 55 seconds. So Magnus playing with 10 minutes, Jan with 7:55. Armageddon. Magnus must win in order to stay alive in the tournament. All right, let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move d4. We got the move knight f6 from Jan, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, and the move g3. Now here, Magnus is playing the classic Catalan defense or Catalan opening, where white tries to fianchetto the bishop and castle the king out of the center very quickly. So we get bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, and now Magnus plays queen c2. When the players did play in their world championship match back, I believe in 2021, this was an opening that did feature quite heavily. So we get the move c5 here, d takes c5, we get queen a5, knight c3, and the move d takes c4. Now, this move queen c2 actually makes me remember some really old days. I believe that I did play this move against Vishy Anand in the London chess class in like 2011 or 2012 in a game that I did win. So this is one of those lines that I really have liked. Now, the reason Magnus plays queen c2 here is to prevent black from taking and getting this quick a6 b5 to harass the white queen. So we get c5 takes, queen a5, knight c3, d takes c4, Magnus castles, we get queen takes pawn, and we have the move bishop e3. Here Jan goes queen to h5, and now we have the move knight e4 being played. What Magnus is doing here is he's trying to play on these two open lanes, the c and the d file, and use these diagonals for the two b's. Jan plays bishop d7, we get queen c4, takes, and now the move bishop c6 is played. Now already here, Jan is showing great preparation, probably not for this game specifically, but just in general in the Catalan, as he has this great b on c6, which really counteracts the b on g2. So after queen e5, we get this move bishop takes f3 being played. Keep in mind, if white were to play a move like queen c2 after knight to d7 followed by rook c8 and rook d8, without this open lane for this light square b and black counteracting it, white really has no advantage here. Honestly, I'd probably rather be black in this position. So Magnus goes queen e5, a very committal move here, forcing a big imbalance in the position. Now keep in mind, this is Armageddon, so Magnus does need to win the game. So we get bishop takes knight. Here, Magnus cannot recapture the bishop because then he loses the queen and the game. So Magnus trades the queens on h5, and now we get bishop takes b7, knight d7, bishop takes rook, rook takes, and the move f3 being played. Now you'll notice that black here has a bishop and a knight in return for the rook. I believe white has a rook and a pawn for the bishop and the knight, but here the only real imbalance is this pawn on a7. So if white can put these rooks on c1 and d1 and keep this bishop at bay, which is completely out of the game, white will be able to use the two towers and potentially win. Jan plays knight b6, we get rook c1, f6 being played here. Another great move from Nepo to bring this b back into the game immediately. If you get back to e8, you can then go to b5 and hit the pawn on e2, and we get this very weird square or diamond. So we get bishop c5 from Magnus, we get bishop d8, we have the move rook f d1, and now the move bishop e8. What Nepo's doing here is he's trying to use the two Bs to prevent any infiltration or kebabs on the 7th rank here. The Bs really do cover a lot of critical squares in this position, and at this point, it's very hard for white to prove anything at all. So Magnus goes b3, we get the move king f7, king f2, knight d5, e4, and the move knight e7 being played. Jan's Bs here really well placed. Again, no access for the two towers, so in the long run, black should be better. So Magnus goes rook d6. We get the move a5 being played here. This is a move that I'm not a huge fan of, but I understand why it was played. The reason that Jan played a5 is he's probably worried that if he goes h5, there might be a move like rook to a6 to put a lot of pressure on this pawn on a7. So we get a5. Magnus goes bishop b6. We get the trade, and now black has a bishop and a knight in return for the rook, but there are some issues here because this bishop on e8 is not targeting anything on this diagonal. It's simply an empty scope. White can try to bring the rooks to c7 or b7, and it feels a little bit iffy. So Jan goes rook to a7, stopping both rook b7 and rook to c7. No kebabs or pins. Magnus goes rook c5, and now we get the move bishop d7, king to e3, and here the move knight c8 is played, rook b8, and now we get knight to d6. Again, Black is not really better here, neither is white, but it's very much a situation where Magnus must try to win the game. So no weaknesses for black. The bishop and the knight covering a lot of the critical squares here, and the rook guarding the pawn. It's very tough to win. Magnus goes f4, we get h6, g4, king e7, and now we get to move h4. Magnus trying desperately to expand on the king side. If he can open up the king side, one very important theme here is that at some point, if you get a position like this, the rooks can start to swing from side to side, and the more open files, the better the rooks tend to become. So Magnus here is trying very hard to open up everything. So we do get knight e8, we get g5, takes, and here we have the move f takes g5 being played by Magnus. Now rook takes g5 is a move that I probably would have liked a little bit more here potentially, because it keeps the rook very active, whereas after f takes g5 there is simply no open g file. On the other hand, the pawn does cover the critical f6 square, so the knight cannot jump back into the game. We get the move knight d6. Magnus goes king f4. We have the move knight to f7, a logical move trying to push e5 and win the pawn on g5 at the same time. We get g6. Now we have knight to d8 being played, and here Magnus plays this move e5. Now this move is not by any means bad, but the move rook to h5 would have led to a really interesting situation, because now the rook is coming to h7 or h8. The knight on d8 is very passive here, and it feels like white is starting to build a little bit of the initiative. Instead, Magnus plays e5, also not a bad move, by the way, as it really prevents black from moving the king. The knight doesn't really have a lot of squares here, but unfortunately black can now play the move bishop to e8, targeting the pawn on g6. We get the move king g5 being played, and now rook d7 being played by Jan here, and Magnus goes rook a8. Magnus cannot play rook takes pawn here, because after knight to c6 the rooks would get forked and you would lose the game. So we get to move rook to a8. Jan plays rook to d2 here, trying to bring the rook to g2 or take the pawn on a2. Either way, at this point in the game, it's looking very tough for white to win. So Magnus checks. We get to move bishop d7. We have the move rook a7, and now we have the move rook d5. We get king f4 and the move king to e8. What Jan is doing here is he's putting this rook on d5 where it's very solid. It hits the pawn at e5 while guarding the bishop and the pawn at the same time. And he's just going to do the classic shuffle with king e7, king e8. Magnus goes rook a8. We get king e7, rook a7, king e8, a3 being played. Of course, Magnus must win, so he has to try and push something on the queen side. Get to move rook d4, king f3, rook to d5 back, and here Magnus goes king g3. Now this is a slight mistake here, but already there really is not a whole lot that Magnus can do to try and win the game. Position is simply very balanced. So you get king g3, rook d3, king f2, rook d2, king e3, rook d5 back, and now Magnus goes king e4 here, which does effectively lose the game, as Jan finally brings the knight into the game by putting the knight on c6. You hit the rook, you hit the pawn at the same time, and the knight guards the pawn at a5. So the construction of the rook, the bishop, and the knight here is simply sublime, and black is winning. So Magnus goes check. We get king e7, rook g8, takes, king d3, and now we have the move rook d5. We get king c3, and here Jan goes king to f6, guarding the pawn on g7 while targeting the pawn on g6, and the rook and the bishop and the knight all are on perfect squares. Magnus goes rook f8, we get takes, rook f1, and now we have the move knight e5 being played. Nice move here, simply guarding the bishop on d7 while taking away a square from the king. We get rook a7, rook d3, king c2, and now we have rook d5 back. Magnus goes a4, and we get the move knight c6, rook a8, and now knight b4. The game continues with king c3. We have the move rook d3, king c4, and now Jan brings the rook back to d5 once again. I really do like Jan's moves here, because even though he's not pressing the advantage, he's not giving Magnus any chance to get up on the clock here, and Magnus has to desperately look in vain for a line. So we get rook g8, rook g8 from Magnus, rook g5 played here to stop rook g1. We have rook f8, bishop c6, rook e1, bishop d5, king b5, and now after bishop takes b3, the game is completely over. It concludes after king b6, takes, rook e6, king h7. We get to move rook f4 here, which is played by Magnus, and Magnus resigns before Jan can play the winning move, which is knight to d5, forking the king and the rook at the same time. Now, even without rook f4, Magnus is completely lost here. There's nothing he can do, so he would have lost anyway. Nonetheless, it's a bit of a shock to see Magnus lose a second Armageddon in this tournament. Honestly, he did nothing wrong in the rapid portion, but he does come up short. He lost the Armageddon game with white to MVL earlier in the tournament, which knocked him out of the winner's bracket, and now he loses another Armageddon game with white in the loser's bracket to Jan, and that means he will finish no better than 4th place. So definitely a shock to see. On the other hand, I think for Magnus, he was simply trying to play this event. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on, and probably, you know, he's just dealing with it. It's not easy, of course, anytime you lose a family member. So difficult turn for Magnus, but I'm pretty confident he will bounce back eventually. He is, after all, the greatest player in the world. So we will look forward to Magnus's return, both in classical and rapid chess as well. So Magnus loses to Armageddon. Jan moves on, I believe, to play Ali Reza or MVL in the finals of Division 1. And now we're going to move on to Division 2. So the next game we're going to be taking a look at is a game being played in the matchup between Vladimir Kramnik, the former world chess champion, and Vladimir Fedoseev, also a very strong grandmaster from Russia. So the winner of this match will move on to play me, and at this point in the match, Kramnik lost the first game with the black pieces, so Fedoseev is up 1-0. So in game 2, must win for Kramnik, or else we're going to get more tweeting. Game starts with d4. We got knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, and now the move e6. Here, Kramnik plays move e3. Unlike Magnus, he does not play g3 and go into the Catalan. He instead decides to play e3 with the idea of potentially playing for like b3 or bishop d3. Now, he did play a similar setup earlier in the event against Frederick Swain from from Germany, and he did lose an Armageddon game. After e3, we got bishop e7, knight c3 being played, Fedoseev castles, and now we have the move h3. After h3, we get the move c5, and I must point out that I have played a lot of these e3, b3 setups against Fedoseev in the past in blitz games, and he always does very well with the setup with d5 and c5, so this game is looking very good from the get-go. So we got takes, we have the move bishop takes pawn, Fedoseev trades the queens, and now he takes the pawn on c5. And in a situation where you must win, being here with queens off the board on move number 9 is not where you want to be. And this also signifies how difficult chess has become, because when Kramnik plays e3, in the old days, this would have been non-theory, non-standard stuff where your opponent might not be prepared. And he even plays h3, another non-standard move here. But Fedoseev is simply prepared and ready for all of this. And so we get this situation where on move number 9, Kramnik is already simply not going to win the game. We have king e2. Now we get the move b6. Black wants to fianchetto the bishop to b7, and we have the move rook d1. After bishop b7, we get the move bishop d2, knight bd7, bishop e1, and now the move rook fc8. Fedoseev has completed his development. He's got these knights on the perfect squares, the bishops on the perfect diagonals, and white is just a little bit worse. So Kramnik goes bishop d3. We get bishop to e7 here, intending to put the knight on c5 and harass the bishop on d3. Kramnik goes king to f1. We get rook d8. Now we have knight d4. And now we get the move rook a.c8. Now here, Fedoseev has decided he made a slight mistake by putting the f rook on c8. But because it's an endgame where neither side really has any weaknesses, it doesn't matter that much. And we also have a very symmetrical pawn structure. All of the pawns are on the same files. So Kramnik goes bishop e2. We get a6, rook ac1, king f8. We get g4. And now the move h6 to stop white from expanding further with g5. Kramnik goes f3, and now we get the move b5, e4, and we have knight to e5 being played by Fedoseev. What Fedoseev is trying to do here is he's trying to pressure the pawn on f3, but also potentially jump to c4 with the knight. Kramnik goes bishop f2, we get the move bishop b4, and now we have the move knight b3 being played. Here we get rook takes rook, and king e8. At this point, still very balanced. White can't easily push the pawn with f4 because then your e4 pawn is weak. The bishop on b4 is targeting the knight on c3, and you control the c file, so it's still looking pretty good for black. So Kramnik goes bishop e1. We get to move bishop c6, knight d4, bishop to e7, and now Kramnik plays b3. Now this is an interesting choice here because Kramnik could have played knight takes bishop on c6, and after knight takes and a move like a4 here, white is suddenly putting some serious pressure on the black queen side, and the computer actually gives white a fairly significant advantage. Now, when you have a former world champion, someone who's renowned for his technical skill in the game, the fact that he doesn't see this idea or he decides not to play it really signifies a lot in terms of how far he has fallen as a chess player versus where he was at during his heyday. So Kramnik plays b3. We got to move bishop b7, a4. Now we get pawn takes pawn. Here the bishop on b7 is always guarding the pawn on a6. We have pawn takes pawn, bishop b4. We get knight a2, takes, and now after knight f d7, White, if anything, is probably a little bit worse because black is going to bring the knight to c5, pressure the pawn on a4, and really the only weakness here for both sides are the pawns on the a file, but white can never really push f4 here, so without a chance to expand on the king side, black will always be fine. Get knight b4, knight c5, a5 being played, and now we have the move rook d8, basically trying to ask white what is he doing with the knight on d4. Kramnik goes king f2, we get the move g5, king to e3, and now we have the move king e7, rook b1, and now rook d7. Black is basically trying to set up where he guards the pawn on a6 here with the knight and the bishop, and now he can also try to go knight g6 and knight f4 to pressure the white king side. We get knight bc2, rook c7, knight b4, rook d7, and now Kramnik plays bishop f1. Of course, Kramnik cannot take the draw. It is a best of 2, so he must play on. We get king d8, we have rook to c1, and now we have the move rook c7, rook c3, and we get the move knight ed7. Here we get bishop e2, rook c8, knight c2, king e7. A lot of maneuvering by both players here, but after knight to e1, finally Fedoseev tries to break it open with this move f5. Now this is an excellent choice because here what's going to happen if you aren't careful, let's just say you keep waiting, at some point you're going to end up in a situation where this pawn on a5 is perfectly placed and white is always going to be spying this weak pawn on the a6 square, and you could actually end up in a lot of trouble. So Fedoseev plays f5, we get takes, and now the move king to f6. Kramnik goes knight c2, we get takes, king f2, and now king f6 back. Material remains the same here, but because of black's better pawn structure on the king side, the h and g versus the f and h, there really are no issues whatsoever, even though you have this weak pawn on a6. You get knight e3, h5, rook c2, king e7, knight c4, rook f8, king e3, and now we have rook f5 being played. Rook trying to maybe pressure the pawn on a5 or the pawn on f3 at the same time. Kramnik goes rook c3, we get the move knight to e6. Nice move here, as now the knight can jump to f4 and hit the bishop and the pawn. Kramnik goes king d2, we get rook c5, rook e3, knight f6, bishop to f1, and now the move knight d5 is played here. Now Fedoseev has clearly outplayed Kramnik in this late middle game, in the end, or into the end game I should say. He's exchanging pieces. Kramnik has lost his good knight, which pressures the pawn, and at the same time black is going to be spying the pawns on f3, a5, and h3 down the road. Kramnik trades, we get king c3, king f6, and now we have the move king b4, rook b5, king c3, and Fedoseev goes rook c5 back, essentially offering Kramnik a draw. But Kramnik, again, cannot take a draw here because if he takes a draw, he will lose the match. So we get rook e1, Fedoseev plays knight f4, we get king to d4 being played, and now the move rook b5. Kramnik goes h4, and now we get the move g takes h4, knight b6, and after rook takes a5, it is evidently clear that with black having 2 extra pawns on the h file and all the pieces guarding each other, that Fedoseev will win the match. So we get knight d7, king f7, rook e5, we get knight to e6, king c3, rook a3, king b4, and now Fedoseev plays rook takes pawn on f3, eliminating the last white pawn on the board. We get bishop e2, rook f4, king a5, bishop c6, threatening to mate on a4. We get bishop h5, king e7, knight c5, and now Fedoseev plays king d6, attacking the rook and the knight at the same time. Kramnik takes, we get king c5, rook e5, king d6 back, and here we have the move rook g5. Fedoseev plays the move h3, pushing the pawn up the board, trying to queen. And here Kramnik actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think he runs his clock down, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that much like the last couple of days, Kramnik did not resign the game and he ran down the clock, or he ran it down mid, as we like to say in esports, simply not resigning and showing, once again, complete disrespect towards his opponent in this event. However, with Kramnik losing this match, this meant that I would go on to play Fedoseev in the next match in the losers bracket of Division 2. So the final game we're going to be taking a look at is my game in the Armageddon against Vladimir Fedoseev. Now, the first game of this match, I lost with the black pieces. In the second game, I won on demand with the white pieces. And so heading into this Armageddon, it felt like the momentum should be with me, even though the match was tied at 1. So ultimately, I bid 7 minutes and 1 second. So I got the black pieces. If I draw the game, I move on. If I lose, I am out. So Fedoseev goes d4. We got knight f6, c4, c6, knight c3, d5, e3, e6, knight f3, a6, c5, knight bd7, and now we have the move b4. Now, the other day when I played Fedoseev in the 4-game match in the top half of the bracket, I did play this move b6. I won the first game of the match from a losing position, and then I lost in the third game of the match. So today I decided to play the move knight bd7 instead. We got b4, b6, a3, a5, rook b1, queen c7, bishop d2, takes, and here Fedoseev takes with the pawn. Now in the first game, Fedoseev actually, yeah, he took, and in the first game after e5, bishop to e2, I played this move g6, which simply was not a very good move, as putting the bishop on g7 is probably okay, but Fedoseev was able to attack very quickly on the queen side, and I did lose the first game of this mini match. So in this Armageddon game, I instead decided to go bishop e7, castles, castles, and mainly the point behind bishop e7 is that if white ever pushes, the bishop and the knight are always spying this pawn on c5 versus the bishop being on g7, where here, after b5, there's no way for me to spy it with my bishop as it's on a different diagonal. All right, so we get castles, castles, queen c2. Here I play the move bishop to a6, trying to get rid of this light square b, which is simply not very active. Now, in retrospect, I think I probably should have played the move e4, knight d4, knight to e5, trying to attack very quickly on the king side, but I ended up playing bishop a6 instead. We got swap, swap. e4 played by Fedoseev to contest my big black center. I go d4, knight e2, and now I go rook fa8. Here, Fedoseev plays knight to c1, trying to blockade this pawn and pressure the pawn on e5. I go queen b8, rook e1, queen b5, queen d3, and now I go knight to e8, hoping that I can get this knight to b5 where it blockades the white pawns. Fedoseev decides to trade. Knight b3 is played here. This is a move that I actually like. I thought he was going to go knight d3, but after f6 with the connect 4 here, I should be doing very well, especially because down the road, I can also blockade his pass pawn with knight c6, and now I've got the connect 4. I've got a protected pass pawn, and the knight blockades his pawn on c5. So we get the trade, knight b3. Here I go f6, consolidating the pawn on e5. Game continues with rook c1. I go knight b8. We get knight e1. And here I play knight c6. Now, probably already here I should have played bishop d8, but I wasn't really sensing a whole lot of danger. So I go knight c6, knight d3. Here I play the move bishop d8. Fedoseev goes f4. And now I play this move g6, which is a fairly serious mistake. What I probably should have played here was either bishop c7 or just decided to take the pawn on f4. But when I went g6 here, I thought that I was stopping white from playing f5. Actually, bishop c7, f5 concerned me a little bit. So I thought by going g6, I stop f5 because I can trade and start pushing the central pawns and win the game. But I completely forgot that after takes, and this move knight a5, now I have serious problems because now the pawn on e5 is a serious weakness here. If I take, suddenly both the pawns on e5 and b5 become very, very weak immediately. And even though the computer says it's still okay, it's starting to spiral a little bit out of control. So I instead decide to play the move bishop c7. We get takes, bishop g5, and here I play the move rook a3. Now this move is still completely fine, but after rook d1, I play this horrible move king to f7. What I should have played here was probably knight to f6. Now the reason I didn't do this is because I thought after takes, rook a1, rook a6, takes, and king f2, if anybody is better here, it's probably white because you have this nice knight on d3 permanently pressing the pawn on e5. You have a protected pass pawn, and white can move with the rook all over the board. Now in a normal blitz game, this probably could be tricky, but with nearly 5 minutes on the clock, I should be able to defend this. But in my mind, I'm thinking about the dark arts with the good knight versus the bad b, and I thought he can make 50 moves. I'm gonna end up in trouble. I can't go for this. So I play king f7 here, trying to bring my king to the center, but this is a very serious mistake because now white can go rook f1 check, king g7, and the move rook to f3, guarding the knight from the side, but intending to double stack the towers and checkmate me on the f file. Now, to add insult to injury, let's say I play a quiet move like h5 here. I know rook f1 is winning, but there's also a tactic with knight takes pawn where the rook hits the rook and the knight also hits my other rook here, and suddenly white is winning the game. So I go h6 here. You'll probably notice that at this point I'm spending a ton of time here after rook f3, and here I'm really in trouble. I play rook a7. I have 1 minute and 46 seconds, no increment. Fedoseev is 5 minutes and 59 seconds, and at this point, during the stream, because I was obviously live streaming the games, I was pretty confident I was going to lose the game. So you get rook f1. I go bishop b8, trying to stop him from infiltrating on the 7th rank. We get rook f8, rook e6, and here Fedoseev plays the move bishop g3. Now this is a pretty serious mistake here. If Fedoseev had played bishop to d8, intending to bring the bishop on this diagonal or start pushing the pawn, white is probably winning the game. And with the time situation, there is pretty close to 0 chance that I would have survived this. Instead, Fedoseev goes bishop g3. I play rook e7 very quickly, stacking my rooks on the e file to overprotect this pawn, but also I want to move my knight and pressure his pawn on e4 down the road. Now, it is at this point that Fedoseev plays the move h3, already not the greatest move, allowing me bishop c7. If I were to go knight f6 right away, I hang the bishop and lose the game. So I go bishop c7, bishop not under attack, and now I intend to play knight f6. And here, Fedoseev plays move bishop h4 in 1 second, and this is the move that throws away the chance of winning the game. Honestly, with 5 minutes and 8 seconds versus 136, if he had played rook f3, knight f6, and rook e1, I think there's still a very, very good chance that I would have lost this game because I have no increment, I'm way down on clock, and he can use his time at the critical moments. Instead, Fedoseev plays bishop h4, and now I can go g5, attacking the bishop. He goes bishop g3, and after knight to f6, suddenly my rook guards the knight. He can't recapture it. The rooks are also broken up here, and I pressure the pawn on e4. So Fedoseev goes rook c8. I take the juicer, plays bishop h2, and now I play knight d2. At this point, I'm still down 3 minutes on the clock, but the great thing about this position is that I have obvious moves. I need to push this pawn to e4 if I can. So we get rook e1. I go knight c4. Fedoseev correctly finds knight f2, stopping the e4 pawn push. I go knight e3. He goes knight e4. And now I play knight d5, trying to guard the bishop on c7 and the rook, but also hit the pawn on b4 at the same time. Fedoseev plays move knight d6 here. And this is a move that is actually a pretty decent move, generally speaking. But in the situation where he needs to win the game, simplifying here means that he is going to lose. So I take, he takes, I take, he goes bishop e5. Now I can dodge with king to h7 because if he takes my rook, I win his rook on e1. So Fedoseev does take, I take, we get king f2, and now I play the move rook e6, rook d8, and I go d3. Now the big issue for Fedoseev at this point is that all my moves are very simple. All the pieces are coming off the board. There are no checkmate threats. So as long as my mouse skills are up to par, I will win the game. So we get here, I take, he goes rook d4, and now I decide to play the move knight c6. Now this is not the best move here, but it's a very practical decision because if I use 20 to 30 seconds to find the precise move, that is time that I will never get back, and I could lose the game anyway. So I go here, takes, I play b4, wanting to bring the king close and just push the b pawn up the board. We get rook d7, king g6, rook b7, I go king f5, we have bishop to h2, and now I go king e4. All these moves I'm able to play immediately because there's a very simple concept and there's so few pieces on the board that there's nothing to calculate. Fedoseev goes king g3. I go here, king c4, trying to push the pawn up the board, and now he goes king f5, allowing me to play knight d4, guarding the rook and checking the king. We get king g4. I go b3, pushing my p up the board. Fedoseev plays rook b8. I go knight b5, shielding the rook from the pawn and intending to go b2, b1. Here, Fedoseev plays king f5. I go b2, sacking the rook because I'm going to promote the pawn to a queen. He takes, I queen. At this point, Fedoseev could resign, but it's obviously Armageddon, so he's going to play on until there are no chances. So Fedoseev goes check, king b3, bishop e5. I go queen to f1 here, trying to win the pawns on g2 or h3. We get rook c5, king b4, rook c2, and now I play the move king b3, and he checks on b2. Here I go king c4, check, king d3, and now he plays rook b2, and here I play the very nice move knight to d4, checking the king on e6, and Fedoseev plays move king e7, which loses instantly to this move knight c6. Now there isn't much Fedoseev could do if he were to trade with 36 seconds versus 112 and a queen versus a rook. Again, it's too easy for me to play because I can just walk my king over, push the pawns over. I can play all my moves literally in 1 second or less here, and Fedoseev will have no chance to flag me. So he goes king e7, I play knight c6, and here Fedoseev resigns the game because when he moves the king, I take the bishop. If he takes back, I have queen to a1, winning the rook on b2. Frankly, king e3 or anything else would also be good enough, but as long as I can get it down to a queen versus a rook here, there's no hope for white. So I would win this Armageddon game to move on to the finals of the losers bracket. Unfortunately, in the finals of the losers bracket, I would lose the Armageddon game with black to Alexander Grishuk, kind of fitting in a way, as I said on my stream, because the two Armageddon games where I was in trouble today against Fedoseev, down 4 minutes in a really bad spot, and against Jules Moussard early in the tournament, I found ways to win those. And the one Armageddon where I was actually doing well out of the opening and it was pretty equal, I blundered and lost. So it's kind of ironic or fitting, or however you want to say it, that the one where I was okay is the one where I blundered and the luck ran out. The two where I got a little bit lucky, I was able to survive, but it is what it is. At any rate, I do hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the from the Crunch Lab Masters, which is part of the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great recaps from various events. See you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.